Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Daniel Drainer, and I have the privilege today to introduce to you guys and interview someone who I think is a pretty incredible young man. He's something that we call uncommon. Zeke Waltz. Zeke, what's up, man?
Hey.
Zeke, you just got done wrestling in the Illinois state tournament. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
So your third time there. And first year you went, I remember we had a conversation. Your first year you went, you were like, man, you were just happy to be there, right?
Yeah.
Second year, I was there second year, and we were kind of just talking about like understanding that you belong there, right? But this year was a little bit different. So what was your thoughts going into the tournament this year, like the moment that you got there?
Like kind of like you said the year before, I belong there, but I was definitely title chasing, because I thought I was best there, so definitely deserved it.
Yeah. So like you went in this year, you're like, dude, I want to win.
Yeah.
I want to win. And man, I think I think you have to have that. But it wasn't really always like that. So, but before we get into that, let's talk about real quickly. Let's go back just a few steps to the beginning of the tournament, the first match. Because there's a lot of things we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about just a little bit about wrestling, but we're going to talk about mindset. We're going to talk about your faith. We're just going to talk about some of the things that have happened over the course in the process over the course of the last few years. But you get there this year, and it's your first match. And what's kind of going through your mind there?
I was like, obviously you got the nerves when you get there. As soon as you walk in, you got the nerves building up, the butterflies. But I walk in, the first match, I was like, this kid really probably shouldn't be too bad. Definitely, anyone could be called at any time, but, I was like, kid shouldn't be too bad. And it was a good match to get settled in to, ready to wrestle the next few rounds.
Yeah. So you get through that one, and you're right, and it has nothing to do with the kid you were wrestling, because we had a conversation before, and the question was, because you were undefeated going into the tournament, like you hadn't lost a match, like you had a couple, you had one close one, and there wasn't really anything outside of that one match, which was against actually a kid who placed third at state in a different weight class. But other than that match, you weren't really challenged a lot this year. And so it's easy to kind of have that thought of, oh my gosh, have I just not wrestled anybody hard? Or have I created more of a gap between me and the other kids? And I think what you realized in that moment, and we had this conversation, is the gap was getting bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't that you weren't wrestling kids who were talented. It's just that you had created such a gap between you and then the next level of competition. And I think you realized that after the first match. And then you went on to the second match, who was actually a kid you wrestled last year. Yeah.
So the second match, we talked about the gap, and after the second match, that's when I really realized that, okay, the gap. Because the first kid, he got fourth at sectionals, could have just been a lucky draw, like, might not be that good. But the second match, kid was ranked fifth in the state, and I majored him, and I was like, okay, yeah, the gap really is just that big.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so you created that gap, and that's really cool because like a lot of times we fail to we kind of sit where our competition is, or like if there's no one really pushing us, like we don't get better, right? Like when you're the best person in the room, when you're like there's no you kind of just rise to the level that you have to instead of beyond the level that's required of you. And I think a lot of times we miss that. And so you wrestled him, you majored him, and then you probably had your toughest match up until that point, the second match against the kid who's a junior, very talented wrestler. And did you wrestle him last year too?
I also wrestled him.
You wrestled him last year, but he was like you. He closed the gap too.
Yeah, he closed the gap. I also wrestled probably more cautious. I felt like that match because it's a semifinals match.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he's a good wrestler for sure.
Yeah. So you won that by 1 point.
Yeah.
1 point. And I wasn't there, so I went up Thursday night, This was a Thursday, a Friday, and a Saturday. I went up Thursday night or Thursday. We got to hang out, watch some wrestling, watch you wrestle a couple times. I went back home Thursday or Friday, and so I had something to do Friday night. But I'm like everybody else in our community, because we're in a small community. So everyone else in our community, I'm like, how do I gotta see what's going on. So everybody's stalking your mom's Facebook page because they know she's gonna go live or whatever. So I'm like, okay. So I go live and I'm like watching this match and I'm like going, oh my gosh, I'm like now I'm next because I'm not there. I'm watching it. I'm like, this is insane. It's close, but I knew once it was 3-2, I'm like, I felt you got that escape. I'm like, okay, this kid's gonna have to really wrestle hard.
Yeah.
And you did that. So now we're moving on to the final. So
yeah. So actually, that semifinals match, I know we're not talking about it yet, but I actually stole that kid's soul too.
Yeah.
I could tell 40 seconds left in the match. Kid gets up, and I'm going back to the circle, and the kid's just sitting there. You could tell that he was done.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and talk about it. And so there is a point, and we're going to get into the book a little bit because this whole process started last year. It actually started last June.
Yeah.
And we're gonna touch on that. But there's a book called it's by David Goggins, and it's called Can't Hurt Me. And that book, you went through that book last year, and one of the things that David Goggins talks about is taking someone's soul. And it sounds morbid, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean taking someone's soul? But the idea is that you become so prepared yourself, so mentally tough, you create an armored mind that there's literally nothing that anybody can do to hurt you. And the moment that that person knows that they can't do anything to hurt you is the moment that you've taken their soul. And it literally takes all the life out of them.
Yeah.
And that actually happened to you twice this year. One was in your sectional where literally a kid walked off the mat, and to his point, he had some other things going on in his life, but that was a moment there where he was just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And you knew, like, you felt what it was like to like take that kid's soul, and he was like he had nothing for you.
Yeah.
Right. And you remember that? Tell me about that in that match in the section.
So that match, kid, obviously, his name's Dalton Hall. I've had many encounters with him where he's beat me in the past, and this summer I've really kicked it into high gear. The past summer I kicked it into high gear, and he kind of just sat back, and got in that match, and my goal was push the pace. He probably doesn't have a gas tank, whatever. So I'm pushing the pace, and I scramble a few times to where he doesn't get what he wants, and I just instantly, I could tell probably 30 seconds in that I just broke him. I heard my brother yell, he's tired, and that kind of gave me an extra, okay, let's go, because he was walking back to the circle 30 seconds in, and I'm pushing the pace, and then went out of bounds that last time, and he was just, he knew he couldn't hang anymore. So.
Yeah, so he walked off.
Yeah.
He left, and it was in the first period. I mean, but that's the kind of thing that happens when you create that armored mind, when you put in the work, and you actually have a tattoo that talks about that. Tell me about your tattoo. What's it say? So
my tattoo says hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Yeah.
So that was my match that I was like, okay, like this tattoo I gotta win this, because if not, this tattoo doesn't mean anything.
I gotta take it. I gotta find some way to get rid of it. Right?
Exactly. So that's exactly. And I feel like that's what happens in a bunch of my matches, where I've just simply outworked the kid. They probably have just as much skill level as I do, if not maybe more, but I feel like I've outworked them, and I have more determination than they do. So
yeah, well, we're gonna jump back to that here in just a moment. But you saw that happen in the sectional, and then you saw it happen in the semifinal.
Yeah.
And like at that point, you were like, you knew that you were now the first wrestler from our community to Illinois has a great thing. It's called the Grand March, which is really cool.
Yeah.
It's two guys from each weight class in each school class, and they're going in, and that's it. There's one match, for everything. And you guys walk in, the music's playing, the lights are down, the spotlights are going, and you were the first person to get to experience that. Not only did you get to experience that, but it was pretty cool because your coaches got to experience that too. Which a lot of times as coaches, I know from being a coach, a lot of times like we want to see our kids succeed, but when your kid's success happens to take you along that journey, it's like even more cool. Like you're like, man, that's really cool. Like it's not like we did that, you did that, you put in the work, but as the athlete, to be able to take your coach along that journey and see your coach have to get to put on the suit, and like that was cool, right?
Yeah, it was pretty sweet. They've always talked about putting on that suit, and I was like, finally get to wear it, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So now we're in the finals, and you didn't win first. You wrestled a kid that won first in state last year in your weight class. Now you're in a higher weight class, and he ends up in that weight class as well, which he didn't start out at, but ends up at that weight class. And now you have to wrestle him, and he's strong, and he's good, and you've put all this hard work effort to get to where you are, and now you're wrestling this kid. And so just real quick, let's talk about that match.
So coming into the match, I knew he was a returning state champ. I knew he was strong. You could just tell from what he looked like. And, my mom's talking about how she's just happy I made it. And that night, I enjoyed the night after I won my semifinals. And, I woke up the next morning, I was like, okay, that's over with. There's nothing about that match left. So I was like, I gotta get this next one. And even if the kid, I kind of reached into the cookie jar, but the kid was just simply better than me. But being out there wrestling, was a cool experience and really neat.
Yeah,
so.
He's a quality wrestler. It was a great match, close match, 6-3. So you had so much to be proud of, and I remember you and we were talking in the tunnel right after that match, and you were just like, you looked at me, you're like, I don't think I could have. There, in my mind, there was nothing. I couldn't have done something different than what I did. And I think when you can walk away like that, knowing that I literally did everything that I could possibly do to get to where I was, and then I don't feel like there's anything differently I could have done in the match. I think you can close that and go, man, I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt, After the match, I wasn't very upset. I knew I wrestled the best I could. Because if I would have done anything else, I think it probably would have been a higher scoring match than what it was, just because he was such a good defensive wrestler. So.
Yeah, and strong. Yeah. And for you to say, gosh, that guy was strong, and there's like, I mean, that means something. Like, he had to be super strong.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of wraps up the weekend that we just had. But it didn't start there, right? So people, they attach themselves to the story kind of like as the season goes. So you 20-0, 30-0, 40-0, and like now there's a following, because that's how we are, that's how people are, and that's great. People love to attach themselves to like success stories and cheer us on, and you had a lot of people in your corner, and we're from a small community, so it's easier for people to get behind that. But where they might have picked up the story at 30-0, 35-0, or 40-0, it really started it started last year, the process. Now, you've been wrestling since you were 5. And we're in your wrestling room right now. I mean, there's trophies and medals, and there's all of those things. But at some point, like, you made a decision that like you wanted to become a state champion. Like, I want to be a state champion. And so you started working hard towards that. And I remember last year, because we had the conversation about you belong here, knowing that you belong here in this tournament. And last year, it was about June, we were talking, and you had said something about, I was like, hey, what weight class are you going to wrestle in? And you were like, well, I don't know, because then you started thinking about like other wrestlers and where they were wrestling, and like that was going to determine where you, do I want to be 152? Do I want to be 160? And right there, it kind of made me think like, you need to create a mindset shift. And so I just challenged you. It was real simple. I was like, Zeke, you need to stop worrying about those things, and you just focus on you. I got a great book you need to listen to. Check it out. And that's when you were introduced to Goggins, right?
Yeah.
So tell me, which surprised me because a lot of times if I give someone advice, like they're asking, like I don't just give people advice, but if they're like, hey, do you have any advice? A lot of times we give it, but people don't they're like, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And they don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
So I was surprised, like a little bit later when you texted me and you were like, I just finished the book. And I was like, you just finished it? Like, so tell me about Goggins. What that happened in June. What happened in your mind when you were introduced to Can't Hurt Me?
Oh, it definitely changed. I grew so much throughout that time. Over the summer, I'd go to work, I'd just plug in and I'd listen to that book the whole time I'm working. And right off the beginning, it was already like, okay, this is crazy. So, it really changed my mindset and, made it armored. So.
Yeah. So his story is insane. Love it. And, if I highly recommend it. Can't Hurt Me, David Goggins. Great audio.
My favorite book by far.
Yeah. Great audio book. That's where you learned to take souls. And you also learned about the cookie jar. And so tell me about the cookie jar real quick.
So cookie jar, basically it's when, I'm trying to think of how to explain it. If you get like nervous or whatever, you should start thinking down on yourself or whatnot. And you just have to think back and think, this is what I've done to this makes me like a beast. Like there's nothing, like has this person done this or so you reach into that and you just pull out and realize how much of a beast you are.
So tell me, what are some of the things in your cookie jar, man?
I've got a few. I've waking up at 5:30. I'll tell you some of the ones I thought about before my matches at state. I bet you no one else was waking up at 5:30, staying after practice. My days were crazy long. I wake up 5:40, read my devotional, and then I work out, get ready for school, go to practice, and I stay after practice until about 6:30 and come home and do homework. So I'm like, there's no one else that's been putting in this amount of work. There's no one else that's reading books that have focused on their mental game as much as I have. No one else. I flipped a tire around the whole lake during the summertime. I'm like, there's no one else flipping tires around a lake.
Like, how many days did that take you? Or you did it?
I did it in one day. That in one day. Yeah, I was like, I was like, Dad, I think I'm gonna try to flip the tire around the lake. My dad's like, I don't think you can. I was like, okay, well, tomorrow morning I'm gonna do it. So I got it all the way around the lake.
Yeah.
And
how long did it take you?
About an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just flipping and walking.
Yeah.
And flipping and
yeah.
And it's not a straight walk either. Like
actually,
there's hills.
there's a big old hill over here. But I actually got that idea from David Goggins. I was on his Instagram one time and I saw him flipping a tire. It's like, just flipped the tire. I think it was like a mile maybe or something. And I was like, okay.
I can do that.
Yeah, I was like, I got that.
Yeah. He says do one thing every day that sucks. And that was probably your one thing for that day.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Because if you can do that, then you can do whatever.
Right.
If you can do one thing a day that sucks, you're mentally just building your mind.
Yeah.
Like I'd wake up every day. I make my bed every morning just because that's something, like a task that I got to get done.
Yeah. And a lot of times, even at people are, oh, you make your bed. No, it's doing those. It's the culmination of all these little things that get us to a place to where we're mentally prepared, we're physically prepared, we're ready. When your life is disorganized and things are chaotic and you can't find anything, or your bed's a mess, and just the little things, all you're doing, it's a simple task. I'm gonna wake up, I'm gonna make the bed, right? And all of a sudden you're winning, right? And so that cookie jar, man, finding all those little moments where you win, being able to do hard things, and that's something that a lot of people, they don't rely on, they don't go back to, because I think at times we can belittle the hard things that we've done in life. Like, I think we look at them and we don't think that they were that difficult when at the time they were extremely difficult.
Yeah.
But we look at them at where we are and we're like, it wasn't really that big of a deal. No, like understanding like you're a bad mamma jamma. Like you can freaking do hard things. Like you've got this. And it's really just creating that armored mind, becoming uncommon. So tell me about uncommon. What's that mean?
Oh, that means a lot to me, because he talks about being uncommon amongst uncommon people and how he went from being a Navy SEAL, like that's uncommon, but he wanted to be an uncommon Navy SEAL, So diving into that really, so after my state tournament, I went out on a run the next day, like there's no one else doing that. I remember I got home from the Muscuda tournament. I worked out that night because I was like, there's no one else, I want to be different amongst these good wrestlers. Like, so yeah, there's these great wrestlers, but then you got that other guy that's just different out of all them, who puts in all this time and all this work, who makes the good wrestlers or the great wrestlers feel bad about themselves for not doing.
Yeah. It makes great wrestlers feel like good wrestlers.
Yeah, exactly.
Being uncommon really that's where that gap is created, right? So we talked about like, are you not wrestling anybody, or have you just created a gap? Like you created a gap. And the gap was just as much in here as it was in all the physical things that you were doing. Because those things, all they do is take, like you have to get up and you have to do them, right? But the battle that people fight the most often, and the one that they can't win the most often, is the one that's right here. Like they can't win the battle for their mind. And you had made a decision that part of being uncommon was that you were going to work on you. Like it wasn't enough just to do pull-ups and push-ups and shoot around in your wrestling room down here. Like you had to work on your mindset, right? And so tell me how important that is to you. Like, what does mindset mean to you? And what's it mean, like, people say, oh, Zeke's a wrestler. What's the difference between being a wrestler and wrestling as something that you do?
All right, so mindset, that's something that means a lot to me. Everyone talks about how sports are 90% mental, 10% physical, and that's very true, but I think that's just not for like competitions. That's like getting up in the morning, mentally getting up is difficult, but once you accomplish it, I mean, you can go do the physical stuff. That's easy. So, mental game, that's probably one of the things I probably worked on the hardest throughout my off season, and I think it really showed throughout the season.
Yeah, and then let's talk about a couple of those things, because it's been cool to kind of spend this process. Like, I don't coach you in wrestling. You've got coaches and you've had coaches, but it's been cool to kind of be able to coach you through some of the mindset stuff the last few months. And we talked about just understanding like who you are and like what you want. So let's go back to a conversation that we had 2 months ago. So you went through this whole summer, like you killed it. Like you were creating that armored mind. You were getting up, you were working out, and then the holidays come around, December, right after Christmas, and you kind of find yourself in a funk. So like smack dab, senior year, undefeated season, and you find yourself in a funk. Describe that to me.
So we talked about how I kind of like stopped growing, it felt like. So my funk was it's probably like 3 weeks where I was struggling to get up in the morning. I'd get up maybe 2 times a week in the morning, and it would just be difficult to put in the morning work and the extra. I'd still stay after practice, but I just wasn't feeling like I was growing mentally or physically, and that was just kind of the funk that I was in. So we talked about it, and it really helped me snap back into getting up, and it kind of made me upset when I wasn't, on my routine, because I knew I wasn't getting better at what I was doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, a lot of times we hit those walls, and it's like success leaves clues, and you were finding success in all the things that you were doing, but for some reason, like we stopped doing those things. Like I don't know why, but we just stopped. And all of a sudden we're just like, why does it feel different now? Why doesn't it feel like I'm winning? Like you're winning matches, but your goal wasn't to be undefeated. Your goal was to win state. Like your goal was like, I want to be the last man standing. Like that was the goal. And so, so we kind of walked through this process of, you know, who you are, what it looks like for you now, and then what it takes to get to that place. And I remember we were having coffee up in Carrollton, and you know, I asked you this question. I said, you know, picture this, state finals, you're there, you know, on that Saturday, whatever the date was. At the time I didn't know the date, but I was like, whatever the date was, what's going through your mind, what just happened? And you know, you close your eyes and you picture this thing. Then I asked you this question. Are you that guy? And you were honest. And your answer was what?
No, I wasn't that guy at that moment, you know. It's because I felt like to be that guy, I had to keep growing. You know, everyone else is out there putting in work. So I felt that to be that guy, I had to keep being uncommon amongst the uncommon people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do. Like you look at and go, are you a state champion? And you're like, no, I'm not. Well, why not? Because I'm not there yet. And so there's only 2 months, like, or a month and a half between that and the state tournament. And so in that moment, in that conversation, we kind of came to the conclusion, like, okay, it's time to get back to the things that were being successful for you. And one of those things wasn't just getting up and working out and doing this. It was creating an armored mind. It was getting the right kind of mindset. And so it was that point I introduced you to a guy named Tim Grover and his book called Relentless.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, if you're ready for the next step, here's the next step, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like there needs to be like a course for like mental growth and like, you know, all these guys come together and go, okay, you're going to start with Goggins, you're going to go to Grover, then you're going to go to Ledbetter and, you know, what drives winning or whatever it is, whatever the process is.
Yeah.
But there should be a course because now you got Tim Grover. And if people don't know who Tim Grover was, he was Michael Jordan's coach, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade. Like, he coached these guys. Like Tim Grover was a guy that brought the best out of the very best and made them even better and pushed those guys. And so, you know, if a guy can push Michael Jordan to be better, he probably knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And so Tim Grover talks about being a cleaner. And you got to read the book. If you don't know what the book is, you got to read through so you understand what he's talking about. But he talks about being a cleaner. And a cleaner, man, he's the guy that gets it done. He is the guy that is confident. He is the guy that, you know, these other guys might succeed, but this guy, he's the one that stands on top, right? And so you started going through that book with Tim Grover. And what kind of, so it flipped the switch in you. What happened there?
So it was kind of just getting back on track to having my mind grow, and I'm reading the book and I'm realizing, okay, to be a cleaner, like I'm already doing most of the stuff that cleaners do, but it was also getting back into that routine of being a cleaner. So I read that book and it just really helped my mind flip back to, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed too, even on your, you know, on your social, because you kind of document the process, and I'm like, okay, there he is again. Like he's back at it, but it wasn't just the work that changed. Like your demeanor changed, your attitude changed, it was just like you felt like this life again. Like, man, like, yeah, we're back, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, we're back, man. Let's do this.
Exactly.
And you started enjoying it. It's not that you didn't enjoy it, but it kind of got to this, you know, it's like this just same. And you had to challenge yourself to grow. And then in that process, you started finding that joy again in competing. Would you say? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree, for sure.
Yeah. So in all of this, our whole conversation started, and it had nothing to do with wrestling, because we were talking about actually just mindset outside of wrestling and understanding who you are, like away from it, because and again, in a small community, expectations get high, right? People look at you and they expect like, oh, and I told you, rightfully so, the things that people say about you, and listen, it's not all great. People don't always say great things about us all the time. A lot of that's birthed out of jealousy or whatever. But for the most part, the press on you from people is just like, oh, what a great kid, great role model, all these things. And I told you, I'm like, Zeke, I agree with those things. But, what happens when we don't meet their expectation? Do we still know who we are, right? And so understanding that, what's it mean to you, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but what's it mean to you when we say, you're not a wrestler, wrestling is something you do? What's that mean?
It just means like that's my lifestyle, that's just something that's a part of me. Trying to think, let's see. So, it's really just like I said, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah. It doesn't define you.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And a lot of times we get defined by what we do. Like people are like, oh, that guy's a teacher. That guy is teaching is what is something I do, but who I am, because we're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna miss the mark.
Yeah.
And when we do, if our identity is wrapped up in the thing that we do, once wrestling's gone, because you just went to a state tournament, and there are kids that were in that tournament that will never wrestle another competitive match again. They're not going to college to wrestle. They're not, that was it for them. And so if their identity is wrapped up into that moment, then what happens when that's gone?
Yeah.
Right? Who are you when nobody's cheering? Who are you when the social media is not lighting up and people aren't following your story and people aren't rooting you on? Who are you? And so why is it so important, and what message would you have for young athletes to what would you speak to them to understand, for them to understand how important it is to know who you are outside of what you do?
I'd say carry over your life into the sport, or the sport into your life. So example of this, I wrestle, but all the work that I put in wrestling, working hard for wrestling, I apply just as much of that work into the classroom or into whatever my goal is. I just don't work hard at wrestling and then, okay, there's school. That's what I kind of meant by a lifestyle, So I work hard, carry it over to whatever you want to pursue.
It's transferable. It's not just it's not just applicable in the sport. When you're done and wrestling's done and you're going on, you actually have offers from colleges that are like, hey, come wrestle for us. And you're going to go and you're going to wrestle you're going to continue your wrestling career at the college level. But at some point, that's done. And you take those lessons that you learned and the things that you created and the process, because that's where the growth happened. The growth didn't happen at state. That was a moment, right? The growth happened in the process that nobody saw, right?
Yeah.
When you were listening to the books, when you were applying things into your life, when you were making a determination into your mind of the things that you wanted to accomplish, the growth happened in the process. The tournament was just that was a part of the process. But the growth happened when you're flipping a tire around the lake, when you're listening to the book, when you're doing your devotion, when you're going through those things. That's where the growth happens.
Yeah.
So tell me about, real quick, you said so one of the first things that you do in the morning is your devotion. Tell me, why is that so important to you?
Because it's just accomplished, that's part of, I want to be the best Christian that I can be. And that's just another thing on the list that I have to accomplish. No one wants to read. That's not fun. I don't like reading. All the books I listen to, they're audibles.
all
Yeah,
audio. Yeah.
I don't like reading. So we talked about waking up and doing something that you don't like to do, but I don't like waking up in the mornings to read those. But at the end of the day, I can look back and be like, I grew as a Christian by reading my devotional in the morning. Like, that's something that makes me a better person.
Yeah. That's something that people talk about. People that wrestle you, people that have coached you, and people that have coached against you. They do talk about your skill on the mat, but just as much they talk about the person that you are off the mat. And what's that mean to you when you hear coaches talk like that?
It means a lot to me, because wrestling's just a side thing. If I can be a good person during that time and be a good role model, and that's the main goal out of everything. Wrestling's just the side thing. So if I can influence someone else, that's a big part of it.
All right, well, Zeke, as we kind of wrap up this conversation, I mean, I've enjoyed, every part of it. I've enjoyed, hanging out with you, over the course of the last year and really kind of working on the mental side of things, and just how important that is. But as we sit kind of in this room and we look at all of the accomplishments, or what people would consider to be the accomplishments, or look at everything that kid has accomplished, all of those things, they're great, but what's the most important thing to you? So when you think about all those things, you think about all the moments your hand's been raised, they're great, but I think there's something for you that's even more important.
Yeah, so like you said, all these things are great, but I can't take these things on with me throughout life. Like, they happen in the moment and then they're over. What means the most to me is the person that I've grown into throughout this process, that I can take on through life and hopefully impact other people with it.
Yeah. Dude, I love it, man. And like I said, it's just been a great conversation hanging out with you. If you guys want to know part of the process that Zeke went through over the last year, we went through Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. We went through Tim Grover, Relentless. Getting ready to work into some other things as he moves on, but those are some great resources for you. Also, Zeke works through his devotionals. He does all kinds of things, but the most important thing really is just understand who you are. Like, understand who you are and what you want. Like, you have to decide what you want, make decisions on who you want to be first before you decide what you want. So who you're going to be, and then you can decide, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? And in that moment, then you have to start asking yourself, what am I willing to do to get to that place? And you've set that example of knowing what you wanted. And in the end, you look at, okay, you wanted first, you got second. But it didn't break you because you know who you are, right? You weren't like, sure. I mean, there were people like kids, and I don't blame them. I don't look at them and think any differently of them. But there are kids that are shattered. They lost. They felt like they lost first, and they're shattered and they're crying, and they're these are teenage young men, and that's okay. But knowing who you are and being okay with the process and knowing how much you've grown, that first would not have validated you any more than second validated you. It doesn't make the process any less. You don't go, oh, none of this meant anything, because the amount that you grew in that time was so tremendous that's what you gained through this whole process. And you looked at that medal and it was funny. You go, man, all this for this little medal.
Yeah.
That's what they gave you, but what you gave you was so much more important, and that's what's transferable into all parts of life. And that's what's going to make you successful, not just on the mat, not at the college level, but when you go to apply those things into life, that's where you're going to win. So, dude, I love it, man. Thanks for the time.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right.